Under the previous order, all post-cloture time has expired. The question occurs on the nomination of Ketanji Brown Jackson of the District of Columbia to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States.
Ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There is, and certainly appears to be, a sufficient second. The clerk will call the roll. On this vote, the yeas are 53, the nays are 47, and this nomination is confirmed.
And happy Saturday and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, April 9th, 2022, and we're so happy that you're in with us today. Monumental week in the history of America. The first African-American woman has been appointed to the Supreme Court. You saw in the lead-in the votes being tallied and announced in the Senate. And one Kamala Harris, which is another historic thing, a Black female vice president making the announcement. And I got to have somebody to talk to all of this about, and that's Val Atkinson. Hey, Val, welcome back to The Deal.
Hello, Ed, and good to be here.
Well, you know, obviously, you're a historian. We frequently come to you to talk about historic events. You know, a Black woman being on the Supreme Court is indeed historic. We've been a country for 230 odd years, and obviously there's never been a Black woman anywhere near the Supreme Court, maybe cleaning up at night. That's about it. And now you have this Harvard educated woman, and we've talked about her credentials here, but talk to me real quick about that scene of Kamala Harris announcing the votes for Ketanji Brown Jackson, how monumental that is.
That is very, very monumental, Ed, simply because if you look in a comparative way at where we were a half century or so ago, or maybe a little longer, it wouldn't have been imaginable for an African-American female serving in the role of vice president of the United States, introducing or reading off the confirmation results for another African-American female to serve on the land's highest court. That would not have been imaginable, especially when you think of it in terms of Kamala Harris not being the first African-American to be that close to the highest office in the land. We have to go back to Barack Obama and his 8 years of service. So all of that can be wrapped up in the cloak of progress. So we're making progress, but there's still a lot left to do. And one of the things I've been looking at your docket of things that we are going to look at, we still have a long way to go. And we're going to talk later on in the program about Tim Scott. But right now, I have to get in my little dig and say that when Ketanji Brown Jackson takes her seat on the court, effectively speaking, she will be the only African-American on the court at that particular time, because we don't consider Clarence Thomas, as serving in that role at all.
Well, Val, you know, I used to worry about how I used to pick at Clarence Thomas. I went back and over the last few weeks, I went back and read pieces that I've written over the years. I'd call him hanky head and, you know, all kind of stuff, right? Pejorative terms. And I felt bad for about 5 seconds until I realized the damage that Clarence Thomas has done and potentially still can do. I'm glad you bring up that point that she will be the only African-American representative or somebody who's sensitive to African-Americans' position. But it brings us to another point. I heard Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, say that the right number of people on the court is 9. Now, you know as well as I do that it's been 5, it's been 7, it's been 9, it's been 11, back to 9. It could have been as high as 13. It can be whatever number they decide on. Can you talk to me about where this magic number 9 comes from? Is it just a phantasm, a figment of everybody's imagination that it should be 9? And then how do you move to put more people on there? And will that ever happen under this particular president?
Answering your last question first, no. This will not happen under our current president. Our current administration, I'm sorry to say, doesn't have the fortitude or the gonads to move forward on a monumental issue such as increasing the courts. But it's exactly what needs to be done. There's nothing magical about the number of 9. As you enumerated, there's been changes over time. Abraham Lincoln, right before the Civil War and shortly based on its emergence, threatened to jail the Chief Justice and abolish the Supreme Court under martial law. It can be done. People have recommended such high numbers as increasing the court by 15, increasing the court to some other number other than 24, changing the rules of the court, changing how long people serve, getting rid of lifetime appointments, ensuring that each commander-in-chief, each president has the ability to appoint a minimum number of positions on the court. There's a lot of changes that's been talked about. But getting back to your first question, I don't think that this administration that's in power right now has the courage of its convictions. And I don't think they would ever increase the courts by any number. Even if we're talking 4 or 2, they would never do that for an assembly of reasons, mainly that they don't want to upset people or get those people in the middle to feel that we're trying to take over the government. We don't want them to think that we're doing the same thing that the Republicans have been doing over the last 50 years. So to answer your question is no, it'll never happen under a Biden administration, unfortunately, but it needs to happen because we're trending in the wrong direction.
Yeah, one of the things that was interesting this week, Val, I watched the documentary about Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers. It was interesting for a lot of reasons. Obviously, they talked about him being a Renaissance man, an inventor, and so on and so forth. But they also talked about him owning slaves. And nobody ever thinks about Benjamin Franklin owning slaves, right? Because he was in Pennsylvania. He lived amongst the Quakers. But they also talked about how he was not religious. And he did not want anything related to religion in the government. They also talked about how he sort of came around towards the end about equality being extended to more people, but still not to Black folks and still not to the unwashed, the vast majority of white people in America, and certainly not immigrants coming to America from places other than England and Scotland and Ireland, maybe France. Which brings up a really tough question here is whenever people start saying, well, the Supreme Court should be only focused on what the founding fathers intended and what they believed, and that you can't adapt the Constitution. And that's why, for example, the Second Amendment is sacrosanct, right? So talk to me real quick about this whole bullshit notion of these founding fathers being so smart that they encapsulated everything. But I just told you, one of the more respected founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, owned people. So he didn't believe everybody should vote, and so on and so forth, a whole laundry list of things. Talk to me about those founders, how they relate to this Supreme Court, current Supreme Court now, and how do we convince other Americans, or do we even bother convince them that those founding fathers weren't as smart as they think they were?
Well, first of all, you have to consider the frame of mind and the state of things that were present during the time that the Constitution was written back in 1787. You have to understand that the Constitution was written with the British in mind. They wanted freedom from the British. When they say all men are created equal, they're talking about all white men. They're talking about British people and people born in what is now the United States of America. These white people are all created equal. They didn't even consider non-whites to be people. They had no idea that the United States of America would end up being the type of political institution that it is now. To have had a Black president for 8 years, to currently have a Black vice president, to have Blacks in all areas of life, business, the arts, to have interracial marriages. They had no idea of that, and they didn't want that. That's why it was no big thing to own other people, to own Black people. And so if you really want a viable constitution to govern the way we live, and that's what the Constitution is supposed to do, somebody's got to start thinking about a constitutional convention. We've got to rewrite this thing. At some point, if you're in business, for an example, and things are not going properly, and you keep making adjustments around the margin, and it still doesn't really change things in a significant way, at some point, you have a discussion about reinventing yourself. And you have to take things down and start all over again, and maybe in some cases even build a new business. Going out of business, new business coming into effect, or whatever. And that's where we find ourselves today, Ed, is that we as Americans don't want to admit that the American experiment has gone awry. And we need to go in there, not with scalpels and tweezers, but we need to go in there with sledgehammers and bulldozers, and we need to start all over again. Nobody has the guts or nerves to say that, but that's where we are. And the only way it can be fixed, you got one side now trying to go back to the 18th century when things were not as they are now. You got another side trying to pull us into the 22nd century. So at some point, you're going to have to get these two sides to come together, and it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Or you have to come up with a new invention. It could mean balkanization. It could mean a lot of different things. But to go on as we are now, as though one day everybody's going to wake up, hold hands, walk down the road singing Kumbaya, I mean, you're crazy.
Yeah.
And I have little patience for it, as you can tell.
Yeah.
I have very little patience for it.
Tell me how you really feel.
We need to really be on the road to start fixing this thing and stop playing games with it.
Well, you know, Val, that brings up a good point. The United States wasn't here prior to 1787. There was, you know, the colonies were not a nation. They made a nation out of those 13 factions of people. And then they started continually murdering Native Americans until they had the whole part of the continent that they wanted. And then they started going off to Hawaii and Alaska and killing those Native people to add that to the American experience, right? But one of the things that's disconcerting to me is there are Negroes among us who seem to be okay with us not making advancements. And one of those Negroes lives in South Carolina. And you talked about people who've ascended to power. Being a senator, you're one of 100, and you're fairly powerful. Here's Tim Scott, and let's talk about him when we take a look at it.
But why specifically are you not voting for the judge for the Supreme Court?
It's a very simple answer. I did not vote for her for a lower court because I believe that her judicial philosophy is inconsistent with what is in the best interest of our judiciary. Can you imagine me then coming back and changing my mind on a more important, the most important seat in the judiciary, the Supreme Court of the United States? It's not Biden's Supreme Court, it's America's Supreme Court. The number of her cases that have been overturned only reinforces the fact that this requires a deeper look. And the deeper I look, the more I realize that her judicial philosophy is antithetical to mine.
That's Tim Scott. And he says that Ketanji Brown Jackson is antithetical to his beliefs. What are his beliefs then if he can't seem to bring himself to vote for Ketanji Brown Jackson? And let me extend this a little bit more, and you can talk about this too, is that we have come to the point where a justice like Scalia or Alito get nearly everybody in the Senate to vote for them. And they're clearly partisan people, right? They clearly have a position, but Democrats voted for them anyway. Now we get to the point where Democrats appoint people, either they don't even get a hearing like Garland, or they only get a win by 3 votes for confirmation like Judge Brown Jackson. So first, Tim Scott, talk to me about this brother, and then talk to me about how we've devolved into these confirmation hearings being one side votes for one person and the other side does not vote.
Well, first of all, Tim Scott is a relic of the past, that he can't seem to jettison that part of his life or that experience that he's had, which was that a couple of centuries ago, all African Americans who were allowed to vote, practically speaking, were Republicans. And we became Republicans because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. And he is credited with signing the Emancipation Proclamation and pushing through the 13th Amendment. So that's how we became Republicans. Most of us, most African Americans, changed parties when we saw that the Dixiecrats were moving over to the Republican Party, changing that, making that ultra right wing. And the Democratic Party was moving over through some of Roosevelt's things and Truman's doings to embrace the African American experience. And that's why you have upwards of 90% of African Americans who vote today in presidential elections vote Democratic. But there is a small faction of people, Tim Scott being one of them. We talk about Condoleezza Rice, and then there's a slew of others who are more beholden to the past because their grandmother and their grandfather were Republicans. And the first time anybody in their family ever voted, they voted Republicans. So regardless of how right-wing and anti-people of color and pro-white supremacy the Republican Party happens to be, these people still are going to be Republicans. I don't understand that. They are affixed to a generational adherence to a particular party. That particular party has changed. The generation you're talking about is long gone and cold, but you're still affixed to that. And that is Tim Scott. Now, he's made a small change over the years. It's not so much that he is affixed to it and can't get out like Condoleezza Rice. He sees this as the life breath for his election process. He knows that he cannot be reelected as a Republican if he doesn't stay true to the Republican mantra, which may be anti-Black. Even if it is, he's got to stay true to that anti-Black mantra in order to get reelected. At that point, he needs to look in the mirror and ask himself, what is my purpose anymore? I have to be anti-Black in order to stay in office. And I think staying in office is more important than telling the truth and helping my people.
Yeah.
He is in a bad way. I feel sorry for him because I think he has given up the ghost in a non-practical sense.
Well, yeah, he has. Val, I hear some music, so that means we got to take our first break. When we come back, I want to talk about, I hate to do this. You know the rule, Val. If I say Donald Trump, we got to play video related to Donald Trump, but we're going to play some video related to 1-6 and Donald Trump. We're going to talk about Don Jr. and Mark Meadows and the Proud Boys and Donald Trump being in Selma, North Carolina, near where you were raised for a little while, Val, when you were a little youngster in Johnston County. He's going to be there tonight. And you know we do this on Saturday mornings. And so we try to be as up to date as possible. We're going to tell you about that and a whole bunch more right after this. We'll be right back.
This just into the Champ Comedy Blog on Facebook Newsroom on the Bless Your Heart Network. Breaking news.
For 37 years, since the show ended, we've searched for James Mush, better known as Mushmouth, from Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. He always wears a red knit hat with a blue scarf and always speaks in Abba Dabba. He also plays a homemade bass guitar in the Junkyard Band. For many years, we figured he'd make his comeback to the national spotlight as a mumble rapper. But no, Mushmouth is now the Republican senator from South Carolina. He voted not to confirm Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court. We reached out to him for a statement that reads, "She be black be, no wavy." Congrats to the new Supreme Court Justice. Find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more comedy news.
The U.S. Capitol, the president of a North Carolina chapter of the far-right group, the Proud Boys, entered a plea agreement today in court. Charles Donahoe pled guilty to 2 felony charges: conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding and assaulting, arresting, or impeding police officers. Donahoe is the first person in the Proud Boys leadership to plead guilty. In this government-released video you can see there, the 34-year-old can be seen carrying a shield he took from an officer. In yet another video, Donahoe can be seen in the crowd with other Proud Boy members pushing to advance up the stairs toward the Capitol. Donahoe also agreed to cooperate with the Justice Department's investigation against the Proud Boys. His sentencing has not yet been scheduled. He faces up to 20 years in prison on the 2 felony convictions.
And welcome back to our second segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. We were talking about our boy Tim Scott when we left. During the break, you saw a comedy sketch from an old friend of ours. He used to be the engineer on Connections way back in the day. John Champion, he's a comedian here in the Raleigh-Durham area. His take on Tim Scott. So I don't know if Tim Scott would appreciate it that much, but I thought it was funny. So check out John Champion. He's a supporter of the program as well. Val, coming back in, we saw that one of the Proud Boys, another connection to North Carolina, one of the leaders of the North Carolina Proud Boys, went ahead and pled guilty to his part in the insurrection. He took a shield, broke into the Capitol. He led rioters. He put his hands on police officers. He did all the stuff that you can think of. And there's plenty of video showing it, right? So I guess he says, well, can't deny it. Here it is. I'll plead guilty. He's facing up to 20 years in prison. But I think the upshot of this, Val, is that we still haven't seen really tough sentences for a lot of these folks. We've seen some people go to jail 6 months, year, whatever. But I think the other part of this is he's saying that he's going to flip on some other folks, which we haven't heard before. Let's talk realistically about 1-6. The 1-6 committee obviously has a mountain of evidence. Is it taking too long for that evidence to be given to the American people, or is it that it doesn't matter that in the end that the people that led the riots had to be dealt with in the courts? Or what's the whole point of this now? We're getting to be almost a year and a half from when it happened, and very few people are in jail. What's going to be the outcome of this?
Well, I think one of the problems is that the whole overall strategy, and I think that's where we're coming from here to try to define that and break it open and talk about it. The whole overall strategy into 1-6 is too fractured. It appears not to be under one set of rules and governance here. And I say that because you got one segment of the program, of the strategy, trying to be ultra careful not to do anything wrong so as to lose the case on appeal. And that's why Merrick Garland refuses to bring charges, or is dragging his foot outside the wagon, as it were. And then you got another group of people who want to make sure that Donald Trump and his family members and the close political allies do time, that we see them in a orange jumpsuit. And you got so many other people who are on the other side saying, I want people to make sure that all of this converts into a I hate Republican type of movement in the United States of America. We got to get all of this together and figure out, what are we doing here? And that hasn't been done. And it paints a position of incompetence. It paints a position of being disloyal to the primary purpose here and genre. And it doesn't make the administration appear that they are anything more than a political hack trying to score political points here. And that's not what this ought to be about. These cases should go to court. We shouldn't put all of our eggs in the one basket of trying to get Trump and his allies. And I'm glad to see that some movement is taking place with Proud Boy leadership and that sort of thing. That's what they should have been doing all the time. But if there is ammunition there that points toward the 45th president of the United States, they should use it. If not, they should follow the law. There's too much, I guess the best word is disjointed strategy here. It's disjointed. It doesn't work together. It doesn't appear to be talking about the same event that happened on the 6th of January. It doesn't appear to be.
Yeah.
So, we've got to draw back, make sure that we have some kind of coalescing strategy to get this thing done and put it behind us.
Well, the other piece of that, Val, that you bring that up, I got this clip from CNN from last night. Let's take a look at it and then we'll talk about it.
Days after the 2020 presidential election, as votes were still being tallied, CNN is learning that Donald Trump's oldest son texted then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows some ideas for overturning the election. This is before the election was called. He wrote, quote, "We have operational control to ensure his father would get a second term."
CNN's Ryan Nobles is one of the reporters breaking this story. Ryan, what exactly do these texts tell us?
Well, Victor and Allison, this is a lengthy text that Donald Trump Jr. sent to Mark Meadows on November 5th. And as you rightly point out, it was 2 days after the election. It was while votes were still being counted, and it was before any of the major television networks had declared Joe Biden the winner. And in this lengthy text, Donald Trump Jr. lays out a number of operational legal strategies that the Trump campaign and Republican operatives across the country would then go on to employ. A lot of these legal theories would not come out until weeks, sometimes months later. But what this text tells us is that there were already discussions at the highest level of the Trump family, within the Trump orbit, about some of these legal strategies that were mainly rejected across the country by a variety of judges. And within this text.
So Val, here's some more text messages. This is Don Jr. He's texting Mark Meadows. Last week, we talked about Clarence Thomas's wife, Jeannie Thomas, texting Mark Meadows. The linchpin seems to be this another North Carolina connection. This is heavy on North Carolina today on the show. Mark Meadows, who used to be a congressman from North Carolina, goes on to become the chief of staff at the White House, and he seems to be the linchpin on all the conversations going on 1-6 and Don Jr., all these strategies that they had laid out for months in advance prior to 1-6, and then they're going to go all through this list of things until they get Donald Trump back in the White House, supposedly is their goal. The other part of this, Val, is that clearly these text messages exist. The 1-6 committee has gotten a hold of them. In this case, even the Washington Post has gotten a hold of them. We see all these text messages from Jenny Thomas and now Don Jr. If this had been, and I hate to play, speculation, if this had been some Negroes talking like this, all of them would be in jail, and some of them may be facing firing squad for treason. I just don't get why this has not been able to push the needle when you got all this smoking gun evidence. And, even Richard Nixon saw the writing on the wall and walked away when it was clear that, the tapes were going to be reviewed. Is Donald Trump just that Teflon where he can't be touched? You remember a couple of weeks ago, the state of New York or the Southern District of New York and some of those other people trying to prosecute him got kind of wishy-washy on some what appears to be clear evidence of him doing shenanigans with his tax stuff. Is it Donald Trump or is it something else?
Well, I can almost look into the future, Ed, and tell you that 50, 75 years from now, you're going to have somebody to ask the big question: how did Donald Trump become above the law back in the 21st century? What happened that made him above the law? Because that's what all of the facts and data are going to point to, that we somehow start treating Donald Trump as though he was above the law. And we're going to make him above the law if we keep treating him this way. And I am of the opinion that nothing's going to happen to this guy. If you're waiting to see him in that orange jumpsuit, you got a long wait. Nothing's going to happen. And the reason for this, Ed, and I think this is what you're looking for, the reason for this is that the Democrats, who supposed to be Donald Trump's primary opposition here, they are afraid and they are walking on eggshells. They don't want to scare off any of those so-called independents and swing voters and people in the middle who may have a modicum of respect and goodwill toward Donald Trump. They want to treat him with kid gloves because they may have to go back and ask for their vote at some November coming up, okay? So because of that, they don't want to do anything to run off these voters and get them to think that Democrats are bad guys. They're trying to put this nice man in jail. So you treat him with kid gloves and you let him get away with murder and you put him above the law. That's where he is right now. So until you change your mind and you say it's okay to tell the 45th president of the United States that he's not above the law and put his butt in jail if necessary, till you get to that point and want to do it, you're going to still play these games and be asking these questions. Well, how can he get away with this and why this and why that? You're going to be asking those questions because some key Democrats have allowed Trump to be above the law. Merrick Garland being one of them.
Well, not only is he above the law, he's above North Carolina. He's flying into North Carolina today to be in Selma. We mentioned it a little bit earlier. He's been to Selma before. He was in Selma when he ran for president the first time. And he pointed to a man in the audience and said, "That's my African-American there." And there was a brother in the audience who was grinning and shining at the time as a Trump supporter. Later on, he renounced his Trump support, but he at least was a prop in that first Trump rally. I'm pretty sure there'll be some Blacks for Trump in the audience, Val, like there always is the Hebrew Israelites who stand behind Donald. Do you think Donald Trump even knows that these people are call themselves Hebrew Israelites who stand behind them with the signs that say "Blacks for Trump"? I bet he doesn't even realize how corny those people are. But I digress. So Donald Trump will be. So if you watch this on Saturday, you'll be as up to date as we are. He hasn't spoken yet because we're recording a little bit before he goes on to speak. But Val, the last thing on Donald Trump. So he's still having rallies. Obviously, attendance has been going down, dwindling some. I expect them to have a decent turnout in Selma. I mean, there's still a lot of Trump flags when you drive down that direction. But what are the rallies for at this point? Do you think Trump really thinks he's going to be in the running for 24, or is this part of his continued money raising that he does because he doesn't have any real businesses? That this is how he makes his money now, is by being a perpetual victim, and that he was cheated out of 2020. Well, why come to Selma in the first place?
But, you ask the other side of that question and you get your answer. What else does he have to do? This guy, he's been president of the United States. He's finagled the financial systems all over the world to be recognized as a rich man. He plays golf a lot. What else does he have to do? Without him staying important in the eyes of people who run politics, he is a nothing man. He has nothing left. He can't set any more goals. So this is a way of staying relevant in the minds of others. So he comes here, he puts on rallies, he raises money, and next thing you know, he's on Fox, he's on MSNBC, he's on CNN, and maybe even The Deal and The Connections if he gets a chance. So that's how he stays relevant. And that's what he's doing it for. It's one of those kind of news, any news is good news, If you're talking bad about me, you're still talking about me. And that's what I want. I want to be relevant. So as long as his name stays in the news, he's satisfied. What hurts Donald Trump is when he becomes irrelevant, nobody talks about him. Nobody makes fun of him. Nobody does anything. That kills Donald Trump. So he's still alive.
Well, I hope that time comes soon where we don't talk about it. One last thing in this segment, Val, before we leave. I saw something this week that really pissed me off. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was up on the Hill doing his regular testimony. And Matt Gaetz, who is the congressman from Florida, who likes to sleep with 17-year-old girls. The real sexual predators turn out to be Republicans most of the time. But he was very disrespectful to Secretary Austin. I want you to look at it and deconstruct for me what's going on here. This is Matt Gaetz and Secretary Austin.
Mr. Gaetz is recognized for 5 minutes.
Secretary Austin, why should American taxpayers fund lectures at the National Defense University that promote socialism as a strategy to combat China?
It's the National Defense University is an academic institution, and I don't know of any such lecture. But
well, that's surprising because it was widely reported. The National Defense University had Thomas Piketty come, and this was the title of his lecture, Responding to China, the Case for Global Justice and Democratic Socialism. So now that you know that they did this, would you agree that embracing socialism is not an effective strategy to combat China?
Well, I certainly don't agree with embracing socialism.
So that means...
I'm sorry. We're not going to do this. We're not going to let the guy say 4 words and still talk and then cut him off. We're just not.
I control the time, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, but...
So, Val, clearly, 2 things that stick out to me. Matt Gaetz is talking about a single lecture at the military university. The United States has a university where they send, the general officers and other, officers to learn how to be better, learn about the world or whatever. They bring in guest speakers all the time. Secretary Austin doesn't pick who those speakers are. Gates knows that. He doesn't know every lecture that goes on there. And besides, the speaker that Gates was talking about is head of the Paris Economic Institute's economics department. And his broader argument was that Chinese need money. So the best way to affect Chinese is to get people in China to say, hey, you're not looking after our individual needs. You're creating an oligarch class like they created in Russia, and you'll end up the same way as Russia. He's not arguing that you should be socialist or communist, because that's what they were. And Gates knows that. So he tries to put Lloyd Austin on the spot. But to me, it shows something else. When you see the disrespect that they've given Lloyd Austin, how does that make you feel? Because I know you spent a career in the military. And when you see that, what does that say to you or reflect to you?
Well, I try to look through all the weeds and get to the main point. And the main point is Matt was trying to put Secretary Austin in a incompetent light. He was trying to show that Austin is not up to the job of Secretary of Defense. And so I think he won a little bit of that argument, because Secretary Austin couldn't answer the question the way he wanted to because he was unfamiliar with it. And that's the point that Matt was trying to make. And there have been some other things that sometimes Austin searches for words when he's talking and trying to make points. And that's always a sign of either age or incompetence or both or whatever. And some are saying, some people on the side of Secretary Austin is saying that prior to his confirmation, he was always known more on the military side than he was on the diplomatic side as a good man. He was never, most of your secretaries of defense are diplomatic and also military. We have one now that's military mostly and a little bit diplomatic. And they're trying to point those things out and put him in situations that he's uncomfortable with. Some of the press conferences that you see, he'll bring along Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And if you take a look at the entire press conference, Milley is the one that handles most of the technical and detailed questions and uses up most of the time answering them, more so than Austin. And the opposition, Republicans, they know this. And they use this trying to put Austin in a bad light, trying to say that he should not be Secretary of Defense, and that at some point, if there's a major blunder made, whether it's Austin's fault or not, they're going to go after him. And they're going to ask that Biden remove him from office. And so that's their strategy. That's what they're trying to do.
Well, I think it's because he's Black, and because the incompetence level of all the people that were in the Trump administration, he was doing appointments of people that he clearly knew did not know anything about defense, did not know anything about the Defense Department, didn't know anything about diplomacy or anything like that. He appointed your guy from Exxon, Tillerson, to be Secretary of State, clearly when he had no diplomatic experience. And all he was there for was to make money for oil companies. So they got a lot of nerve. It pissed me off. I mean, I think, Austin is a decent man. He has served the country, and to constantly get this BS from people like Gates, who, like I said, likes to have sex with 17-year-old girls, is problematic for me. And I'm not going to mince words on that. He's the child rapist, right? And they're always trying to put it on somebody else. Anyway, I hear some music, man. So that, you know what that means? We need to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Tar Heels. Anyway, stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
Listen, you're my friend.
I noticed you haven't really been yourself recently.
Yeah, I feel like something's up.
How are you?
Are you okay?
Is there anything you want to talk about?
I just want to know how you're feeling.
And listen, even if you don't know what to say, I'm here to talk.
No matter what you're going through,
I just want you to know I'm here. I've got your back.
when you want to talk, I'm here.
Defined this Carolina team. They were an 8th seed. That's the lowest seed the Tar Heels have ever been in any NCAA tournament, and they fought all the way to the Final Four, the final game, and to the final whistle. In this game, Brady Manick took a few shots to the face. Caleb Love and Puff Johnson each suffering injuries, but all played on. But this team's toughness was epitomized by Armando Bacot. Gutting through an ankle injury at the end of the Duke game wasn't enough. He did it for nearly 40 more minutes Monday night until another rolled ankle finally forced him to miss the final few sequences. He finished with 15 points, 15 rebounds, and the nation's respect.
It was a 4-on-5, and I was just trying to get back and do whatever I could, even if I was just contested shot or do whatever. But, I mean, I really struggled. I couldn't really put any weight down on my right leg. And I don't know, I mean, right then and there, I probably knew I was done at that point.
And welcome back to our final segment of the deal. You know, Val, in the breaks, we always have a chuckle about something. And I was chuckling because we're going to talk about the Tar Heels real quick. You saw the clip coming in. Obviously, they lost. I think, we wanted, I know I wanted them to win. You wanted some team from Durham. I think Durham Tech was in there. You wanted them to win. But the Tar Heels acquitted themselves very well, especially Armando Bacot, who ended up with 6 double-doubles for the tournament, did very well. Actually, my team that I had picked in my bracket, which was Kansas, they end up winning. So it was kind of, bittersweet for me. I had the Tar Heels losing to Baylor. So what kind of fan am I? But Val, talk to me about the historic nature of the Final Four, and then that game where Kansas has also the biggest comeback in NCAA history to win. You couldn't write a more dramatic, movie. It had all the elements in it. Bacot with a bum ankle, blah, blah, blah. Talk to me about the Final Four and then the final game.
Well, the Final Four was historic. There's no question about that. And I got a lot of my buddies who are texting me back now saying, hey, man, you were right, because I called the Carolina-Duke game. I said that Carolina would win, although I was a Dookie. I've been a Duke fan since 1983. I called that in favor of Carolina because I knew the way that both teams were playing. And if both teams kept playing like they had been for the previous 5 or 6 games, there's no way Duke was going to win that game. But getting down to the the Carolina-Kansas game, for one of the few times in my life, I found myself rooting for Carolina, being a Duke fan, because I wanted to see the title come back to the state of North Carolina, more so than I hated Carolina as a team. So I'm pulling for Carolina, but I was afraid, and I had penciled in Carolina to beat Kansas. But I didn't really think that Carolina could revert back to the way they played 3 months ago. And that's the exact thing that they did. They started playing like they were playing 3 months ago. Davis and Love couldn't throw it in the ocean from a rowboat. And Bacot got hurt. And they were doubled and sometimes triple teaming Manick. And that's your whole team right there. And they still scored 77 points. I thought that was outstanding. But the defensive effort lacked. And they couldn't stop Kansas from making a run. And they should have employed some different kind of defense, maybe a zone defense or whatever, something different to stop that run. And they didn't do that. It's as though they said, okay, make your run. And when you catch up from these 15 points, we'll call timeout and see what's going on, and we'll see if we can catch up. Wrong attitude.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought they should have called a timeout when it had got down to about 7 or 8. But that brings up another point: coaching. Hubert Davis has gotten a whole bunch of accolades from this. I think it quelled a lot of fears that a lot of folks had. The way Carolina started out the year, they were going to be like, "Oh, Hubert's going to be there for 1 year, and he's going to be like Darty, right? That you can't bring back an old player and stick him in as coach, and it's not going to work." But it seems like the players, like him. He has the right attitude. Darty was a bit standoffish and a little cold, even as a player and as a student at UNC. I don't know if he was ever the right choice for the job. Phil Ford was always my choice for somebody to bring back if you're going to bring back a player. Which brings us to Duke, the Durham Tech. So Kay's gone. Shire's now the coach, but we find out that Nolan Smith is leaving to be associate coach at Louisville. And Nolan's been on this program before, and I want to get him back because I want to talk about his move to Louisville. But Nolan's dad was a star at Louisville, so it makes sense for him to go there. Louisville now has their first black coach. So the ACC is going to have another school with a black coach, now with a heavily black staff. So you're going to have, UNC, Louisville, NC State, Florida State. There's going to be a lot of teams in the conference that have Pittsburgh that have North Carolina connections, that either played at Duke or UNC or whatever, and now are going off to coach at other schools within the ACC. And the ACC is obviously the preeminent place to come play for basketball. What does that say about basketball that's different about football? Because we still have not seen black coaches emerge in football. Even at the professional level, we saw what happened last year towards the end of the year with the coach in Miami. Why is basketball different than football, where they can't seem to hire black coaches?
Well, I think that in basketball, the powers that be have made a decision to accept the intellectual prowess of African-American men to lead other men. Because once the people on the floor became almost 100% black, the players, then it became okay for African-Americans to stand up. Football is that way as well, but the difference is the powers to be in football still see the management role as more akin to business and politics than sports. In other words, the more you are removed and appear to be aloof from your players, the better manager or leader you happen to be. The more moving parts you have, the more difficult it is. And the more difficult it is, the whiter the coaching staff must be. And we're still suffering from this stupidity. And it'll come around after a while as you're seeing more black coaches come in to the college level and to the NFL now. But it's going to take some time. We got lawsuits going on. You got Brian Flores with his lawsuit against a couple of teams and the NFL talking about discrimination. A couple of other coaches have joined him now. So we're going to see some movement. The NFL has gone forward and say that they want a woman or a non-white person to be on the offensive side of the ball as a coach in next year. So there's some movement. I think the NFL is hearing the footsteps coming up behind them, and we're going to see more African Americans and other non-whites and females take a leadership role in the National Football League.
Yeah, I do too. And speaking of women, Don Staley down at South Carolina won another national championship for the women. I watched that game. Very intriguing. Women's basketball, not above the rim, no dunking and all that other stuff, but good fundamental basketball skills were on display, particularly with South Carolina. Their defense was stifling to everybody throughout the whole tournament. In their first game in the tournament, they played Howard University, Val, and they held Howard to 9 points in the first half.
Stifling
defense. And then Don Staley brings that on home. We still thinking about Brittany Griner and hoping that she gets home soon and that she's being treated well. There's another sports story, though. I tell you, we were very North Carolina heavy today, right? The next sports story I want to talk about is Harold Varner III from Gastonia, North Carolina, Forest View High School in East Carolina University is 2 under at the Masters. Hold on a second. Let's look at some tape of Harold talking about being at the Masters.
As a golfer, you always can find something, but it's been great experience. But like the best experience is playing well. You know, at the end of the day, that's what I want to do. That's very selfish, and I'm totally okay with that. I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. You know, it's only going to get tougher. You know, everyone's going to keep talking about it, but I just want to have a chance to win. He does a really good job of making sure that you're comparing you to someone else or running someone else's course. And I'll never forget, Tiger told me the greatest thing. He's like, I asked him, what does it take to win? He's like, you just keep worrying. You quit worrying about winning. You'll keep in that. It's helped my demeanor. Just do what I'm good at, play golf, hit the shot that it calls for. And I think.
Now, Val, you're a golfer. I'm an erstwhile golfer. I pull out my clubs and threaten to hit people with balls every now and then. I am extremely impressed with Harold. Everybody's talking about Tiger, who had, by all means, a great recovery yesterday. It could have gone bad for Tiger. He had a couple holes in a row where he bogeyed, where he probably should at least parred, and then he was in danger of not making the cut at one point, and then recovered 3 holes in a row to get back to 1 over. But Harold Varner played well both rounds so far. He's 2 under it. That makes him a 6 back at this point. What do you know about him? And what do you think about what he said about this advice that Tiger gave him?
Well, I think the advice that Tiger gave him was a soothing piece of advice. In other words, he basically said something of the nature that stop going out trying to win the tournament and just concentrate on your game and play well, and then you'll be surprised at how well you do. Because Tiger saw in Harold a kind of a push, and he was pushing so hard to win a tournament so he could get in the Masters that he forgot about improving his game. So Tiger gave him some sage advice, and obviously Harold took that advice, and voila, what do you know? He won a tournament last year, and now he's in this year's Masters and doing well, like you said, only 6 strokes back. There are 4 African Americans in this tournament. Well, if you want to call it that, if you want to call it Tony Finau, and also you have Corner Champ, and you have Tiger Woods and Harold Varner. So those are 4 people that you have that are listed as African Americans being a part of this particular tournament. And they're all doing well. At one point yesterday, all 4 were 1 under at one point. And I think it was at the start of it, or was it Thursday? I can't remember.
Yeah, at some point on Thursday, yeah. Mm-hmm.
At one point on Thursday, all 4 were 1 under par. And it would have made for a heck of a pairing there. But I think Harold has a great future. If you take a look at what he's done in all of the tournaments, he's been right up there in tournaments that he didn't win. He was always high up on the leaderboard. So I think if he shows well in this Masters, that's going to give him the self-confidence that he now has arrived. He doesn't have to prove anything to anybody, and he can just work on his game and show the kind of golfer he really is, that's going to put him up to another level. And I look forward to seeing some great things out of Harold in the near future.
Yeah, his tee time today is 2:30. So if you catch this before 2:30, make sure you catch Harold Varner III from Gastonia, North Carolina, Forest View High School, and East Carolina University. Val, again, I've owned golf clubs for 40 years now. Don't play as much as I should. I know you used to play a lot. I want to tell people that every sport is for everybody, right? That there would be more successful Black golfers if we didn't turn our nose up at it. It's unbelievable to be on a really nice course and to be out for a walk with your friends and playing a game. It's very skilled game. It requires a lot of thought. There's a lot of etiquette in it too that teaches you to be patient and things like that. But all sports have some component to it that could teach you something. So if your kid's interested in golf, get them some golf clubs. I'll say that. I'll make a plug for golf today because I think it's a great sport. But I've played a lot of different sports. I played hockey, peewee hockey. I played lacrosse. I played rugby. People know that, and ran track. So there's something for everybody in every sport, and don't downplay golf. I really want you to pay attention. But we got one more story today that I want to cover because we were supposed to talk about COVID last week and we ran out of time. I wanted you to see a clip and then we'll talk about COVID a little bit.
And we are now 2 years into the pandemic, and a new study just found out that people with certain sleep disorders, like sleep apnea, have more severe outcomes with COVID-19.
That includes a 31% higher rate of hospital visits and death. But this study by the Cleveland Clinic found that while those with sleep disorders did have lower oxygen while sleeping and more severe symptoms, they were not at higher risk for getting the virus.
Researchers also learned that it didn't make a difference whether people were using a CPAP machine prior to getting sick. They still experienced the same kind of severe outcomes.
We also
So Val, there's a study out that says that if you have sleep difficulties, you don't have good outcomes with COVID, which seems to makes sense, right? If you already have breathing difficulties or whatever, you have COVID. The study itself is not surprising to me. I think what's surprising to me is that we're 2 years into this shit, and I had to go get another booster. I talked last week about the fact that I was going to go get it. So I'm on my second booster. So that means there's 4 shots total altogether that I've taken. And that there seems to be another variant that's looming. We know what happened after last spring and summer. We got hit really bad in the fall, and then we got hit really, really bad again after Christmas. I think people want to ignore it, but instead of ignoring it, Val, take it for what it is. It is a serious health concern that we need to be thinking about. And now what this even shows you with this sleep study is that we're having to look at it in much broader terms and longer term implications to COVID. Anything you want to say about COVID today? Have you been thinking? Obviously, we haven't been thinking about it as much, but I know it's always at the, tip of our mind. It's on our minds because we can't get away from it.
Well, I would say this, since we've been harping on North Carolina today in the show, let me stick with that and say that at the state level and many of the municipality levels, we've removed the mandate for wearing masks and doing some of the other things that must be done. But it says remove the mandate. It didn't say reverse the mandate on masks. So I would advise all citizens, not just in North Carolina, but all citizens, if you have pre-existing conditions or if you're over 50 years old, especially if you've had someone in your household or in your circles to attract the COVID virus, I would advise you to keep wearing your mask. even though you're going into a facility that says the masks are no longer required, you put the requirement on yourself and you continue to wear the mask. I think that's an added layer of protection. Don't take the mask off, folks, if you are considered to be one of those categories that are at high risk. Please don't do that. That's my advice to folks who are over 50, pre-existing conditions and the like, or have attracted COVID already yourself, or someone in your circle has done so. Please, please keep wearing your mask. That's my advice.
I agree with you 100%. I still wear mine, so I'm not self-conscious at all. I've gotten used to it whenever I go into a setting with people. Obviously, I don't know or whatever. Hey, Val, we're about to run out of time. So as we always do, I'm going to ask you what we got coming up in the coming weeks, or anything we need to know.
Well, you know, sometimes I talk about books, and I wanted to show this one right here. I'm into rereading sometimes, and I'm rereading a book that I read some time ago by Thomas Mann and Norman Orstein, and it's entitled "It's Even Worse Than It Looks." And I tell you, it is, folks. It talks about the way we are right now let me read the subtitle. It says, "How the American Constitutional System Collided with the New Politics of Extremism." And their title said it's even worse than it looks.
That's heavy.
We talk about how bad things are sometimes. Read that book, folks, by Mann and Ornstein.
Well, that's a good recommendation. Yeah, you know, folks, like I said, we're very history heavy here. We're also very, book heavy here. We talk about authors. We've had authors on here. We need to do more of that. We're going to do that in the coming years. So, look, watch the Masters today, 2:30. If you catch this afterwards, follow Harold Varner III from Gastonia, North Carolina, East Carolina University. Donald Trump is in Selma. Please stay away from Selma, North Carolina today. That's my public service announcement. Do not go to Selma. And in the meantime, guess what you should do? You should go do something good for somebody today and come back here next Saturday. You've been watching The Deal. Thanks. Bye. Cool. But